speak about the Allin house. I think I stood here 14 years ago, the first time doing this, and that underscores, one aspect of this process for me, which it's been kind of long, and so I feel a little sheepish about that. And I also feel sheepish. The name, is the title, the General Thomas Allin House. I mean, that was kind of inherited from the town kind of plaque thing coming forward, and I never really sort of unthunk it or rethunk it. Although I'm really a fan of Thomas Allin's spouse, Amy Bicknell Allin, and she is going to be in this slideshow a couple of times. I do want to think back to one other in our listing that you mentioned a couple of times, the Allin West House. And it's just a weird fact of Barrington history. There were 3 unrelated Allin families in town. So the Allin West House belongs to one of the 2 Allin families that spelled it with an E, not an I. And the fact that we ended up calling it the Allin West House was really because of that period of significance in farming, and it was the 2 families over together. It was like 6 or 7 generations of farming, and so that sort of removed a masculine given name from it, and it just became 2 family names. So that's sort of a sideways sort of neutrality, which I suppose is progress. I want to share, a lot of kind of personal perspectives on what I have gone through in 15 years. So this is going to be a little bit more impressionistic and a little bit less objective than what Sarah set us up with, which was very well done to kind of situate the Allin house, the Allin Lanai house, in this larger cohort. That frees me up to talk about the house in ways that I haven't really shared before. And it's just 1 week shy of 15 years ago that we bought the property. So it's actually, which is not that long ago, but it does also feel like a long time. So for us, this was a big kind of bargain priced house to move into as a 3-generation family. My parents, my wife and me, and our 4 children. We were consolidating from 2 houses to 1 house. My professional background as a historian and a genealogist meant that something this old didn't scare us off, but we didn't specifically seek it out as a project. It was, because it was old and weird, it had been passed over by a lot of other people, so that gave us an opportunity. And selling 2 houses to buy 1 house meant that we were in a position to do some of the renovations necessary to adapt the space for multi-generational living with 2 kitchens. And in Barrington, that meant going to the zoning board for a special use permit to have that second kitchen be legal. There was the vestige of an earlier illegal second kitchen still in the house when we bought it. And so this is what we did in the summer of 2010. It was my first foray into researching the history of the house. Less than a month into owning it was the time when I first walked into the Barrington Preservation Society to pull its file, to start learning about it. Probably within a matter of days, I met Bonnie Warren, and she sort of took me under her wing about it. And Bonnie was thrilled to welcome another old house nerd to Barrington. She liked to remind me that her house was older. And through our contractor, Bob Major of Preservation Cooperative in Warren, we got hooked up with architect Lombard Posey of Bristol, and he was the other great sort of brain on the project. I think that's the first time I was in the room with Stephen Venuti, because Stephen, you were on the planning board back in 2010.
Zoning board, I made the motion to approve.
And part of my naivety was preparing for the special use permit. I had this totally wrong idea that the history of the house had some relevance to the zoning board. They couldn't have cared less. I had compiled a 2-page timeline documenting the house had a 150-year history as a multifamily property, and they couldn't care less. That was totally irrelevant to them.
For the record, I cared.
But I didn't realize also that was just, for me, that was just scratching the surface. I was hooked, and my 2-page property timeline continued to grow, and it's now 15 pages and 8,000 words. Just the property timeline with the abstracts of all the deeds for compiling the Allin farm and then piecing it off piece by piece. So I also learned that the house had featured prominently in the history of Barrington, but specifically because Barrington's most prolific really kind of logorrheic historian, Thomas Bicknell, had inherited part of the house from his stepmother, and he wrote a lot about it. He inherited a lot of Allin family stuff from her. And this photo of the house in his 1898 History of Barrington, it's the earliest photo we have of the house. And you'll see I went on to accumulate a bunch of other photos. So with approval from the zoning board, we did work with Lombard Posey to essentially render what the house was in its present state, and he did these beautiful drawings by hand. He did all the architectural drawings by hand, and he offered us guidance in what to do to the house, which in many respects sort of coincided very nicely with things to do to restore some aspects of the layout of the house to what it originally had but had not had in the intervening generations. And in other places, well, we couldn't do that. We had to do other things too. And I'll just show you a couple of examples of that. And so as we carried out the renovations, I began to learn about the house and its history. And so here's one of the cases where what we did was actually to return the house to its original layout. This is the second floor sitting room. The sort of the north-facing chimney of the central chimney mast is sort of standing with us. And we're looking at the back of the house, and you see two different wall colors. It had been subdivided into a kind of a little hallway, and then a bathroom, and then another kind of space. It had been carved up oddly, and so we were able to pull all of that out and kind of restore this room to a kind of central keeping room study, which I then lined with books, which the house can sort of barely support. And it's okay. I'm sort of gradually weeding out the books. That's okay. And so my other favorite thing is Amy Allen's bedroom. So we know who slept where because in some of the very elaborate deeds of division, including after General Allen's death, his widow got a third of the house, and it specified, well, this was her bedroom and had the nicest woodwork. Even though it was sort of his and hers bedrooms built with, so he got B+ woodwork, she got A woodwork. I just don't comment further on the separate bedrooms. But here we're looking at sort of 2/3 of this glorious fireplace surround, which was what we had when we bought the house in 2010. And we were able to open that up to take out the 1802 wall that had kind of cut off 1/3 of that whole aspect. And then, of course, my daughter's successive occupations filled it with craziness. And that's the way houses work. So the best and oldest woodwork in the house hadn't had anything done to it that you really could tell. I think there's a little bit of replacement of real with not quite so real, but it had stayed intact. So it's the only room that's still in its 16-foot square configuration, and it's still got crown moldings and these sort of oddly not quite matched mott boards at the top. And that's actually identical, very closely to identical woodwork with the main parlor of the Allin West house, which is within 10 years. Some of the moldings are exactly the same. You know how you can tell with your fingers more than even with the eye. And so it's really astonishing. The different floor plans, but some of the same woodworking jigs for sure. And then in other places we had to change things. And we did have to remove a couple of walls that were original Georgian walls. But even where we were able to do that, what I realized that you learn so much by opening things up. And so here we're looking at some of the exterior west wall of the Georgian house, which had been enclosed when the 1857 west addition was built. And we opened up some more of that wall, and I think we ended up, probably getting rid of most of that clapboard. And we only have one place that's in a different part of the house now, where you're looking at the original exterior clapboard from the Georgian house, while you're still in an interior room from another added-on feature. And I spent a lot of time going back and forth to the house site. It was months of work before we moved in. My youngest son was 1 at the time. He spent a lot of time in the house. He got to know all the workmen, and his lead levels were elevated by the time he was a toddler. And it's not like he was going around snacking down the paint, but it's just like inevitable. And then we had to be anxious and wait for them all to go down as they did for him. I vividly remember the day when Bob Major said, "You got to come up to the attic. There's some weird stuff up here." and we discovered that a lot of the partition walls in the attic, which are just rough pine planks, were plastered with scrap paper from the Allin family. A lot of it's legible, and it's still there, and it's stuff that dates back even before, well before the house's construction. So there are papers from the 1740s, farm accounts, odd scraps of legal things. The father of the guy who built my house was a leading person in his generation, and this is these are farm accounts. This looks like the general's trigonometry homework, when he was learning surveying or navigation, or both. And then the coolest part of the paperwork up there, which took me a while to really understand, was this. So he held a lot of town offices, and he was the tax assessor in the 1790s, the last year of his life. And this is a page from the 1798 Federal Direct Property Tax Assessment, which is lost. And it's not lost because there's a page of it pasted to the wall in our attic. It's just that they're lost for almost every community everywhere in the 13 states. But he was, he was doing pen trials on one, so he filled out just a single line across this. It's a pre-printed form, and so he filled out the data for his own property, and he wrote his name on it. So his signature is on this piece of paper pasted to the wall in the attic, which is really, it's kind of cool. So in that year of discovery, I was really excited. I felt I'd learned a lot about the house. And then it was within that first year that I put together materials, and I gave the first presentation that I gave here. Oh, this is one other cool thing I found. So there's the main sort of floor of the attic that goes, from eaves to eaves, and then above the collar ties, particularly in the west, or just in the western part of the house, there's a kind of layer of planks, and it's clear that, people were up there. There's stuff up there, and just stuff domestic detritus, including somebody had clipped out a poem from, I've got it here, April 21st, 1791, a Providence newspaper. They clipped this ode, thought it was cool, maybe they memorized it, I'm not sure, and it was just still there, sitting on that loft when I found it, whenever I found it, 2011. So in that first year, all this stuff excited me, all the material, the deed research, and what I knew about the fabric of the house and how it had grown. And that was when I gave my first presentation here, and it was when I really first started getting more involved with the Preservation Society. And I compiled this genealogy. This is the first version that I did, and it's a genealogy of all the owners of the house, beginning with the foundation of the Allin family farm in the 1670s by William Allin from Prudence Island. Jeff, you were asking me about him. He's the great-grandfather of the man of the couple for whom our house was built, down to 1924, when the last descendant who owned a third of the house sold his portion to the folks who were unrelated who owned the rest of the house. So that's a solid run of, I can't do the math, however many years it is. And I'm going to show you another version of this tree in a few minutes. So at that time, armed with all this information, I made a presentation here in the library, and then I went straight to the Historic Preservation Commission to initiate the National Register process. And at that time, I'm not sure whether you still offer it. There was a separate form called like the Historic Homeowner Self-Nomination Form. It's kind of a streamlined thing. It proved to be a bad idea. I don't know whether I had any part in that. Well, I was all excited, and it was a great day. And I remember going to the first state review board meeting, and of course they liked it. I mean, it was fine. It was great. And so back then I was working with Rick Greenwood, the late Rick Greenwood, who lived in Barrington, and it was Rick who told me. He opines that there's an interesting piece. I don't have a slide here. Kind of black sandstone set into the kitchen firebox with this sort of scooped out sort of depression in the center, and it's inscribed TA 1783. And for a long time that was really thought to be, does that represent the year the house was built? I think that represents the year of the slab, but many people have concurred that stylistically and the fabric of the house shows it's a little bit older than that date. And so now that you haven't gone through the official process, the date is, the goalposts are 1769 to 1774, and there are all kinds of reasoning behind that. But it was Rick who said, "Oh, that's a sharpening stone for all your, carving knives if you're roasting fowl in the fireplace." And of course, I realized even getting the thumbs up through the historic homeowner pre-approval process that I had plenty more to learn. This was just the beginning of something. And what happened in the next few years is that I started to do all sorts of other things with other projects with the Preservation Society, and so the house kind of waited. And it waited for 14 years, as it turns out. A bunch of things happened in that time, and I just want to go through thematically as well as chronologically some of the things that really, defined our journey. One of the first things that happened was in a presentation, in my 2011 presentation on the house, one of the folks in the audience had been the owner of the house back in the 1970s, and I realized, oh, well, here's a great opportunity. That was a Mr. Stevenson, I think. It was your father, yes. I remember vividly in this room, I think it was before one of the renovations, and meeting him afterwards. And it was that engagement that encouraged me to seek out other people who had also lived in the house. And so these photos came from Martha Wiley over in Cranston. And I also were visited by other people, brother and sister who had been kids in the house in the 50s, the Burgesses. And it was the Burgesses who told me that a couple of division walls in the unheated rooms that turned the typical 5-room Georgian plan into a 7-room Georgian plan, which I didn't realize was unusual, but I had the testimony of the former Burgess children who remembered another one of those walls having existed back in the 1950s. And so it was a way I realized it was a great way to connect not just with the dead people, but with living people who had a connection to the house. And that's something that's really continued over the 14 years. The cool thing about these two photos that Martha Wiley sent, the one from the southwest there at the top shows that the work raising the roof was relatively fresh at the time. You can see the siding. This is a Xerox of a print, so it's not so great, but you can see the different colorations in the siding. They had just raised the roof line of the addition. They had swapped out some of the windows, half size for full size and vice versa. And the photo of the back of the house is great. It's very, very rare to have photos of backs of houses. And a lot of times what's on the back of a house, the trim, the window surrounds, just odd little things, are the stuff that doesn't get updated. Nobody gets anxious about what the neighbors and the passersby are going to think, so the good old stuff sticks around. But if it hasn't stuck around, but if you have a photo at the back of the house, you often can learn a lot from it. One of the next things that happened in my journey with the Preservation Society was the heating up of the Knockham Hill development dispute. And the Preservation Society went from interested scholars to, bystanders, to interested scholars, to advocates, to litigants. And that was a really exciting time. It was definitely a time for all hands on deck, drop other projects, and let's get excited about what we can do to save what we had inklings was historically significant, and it's only years later that we've learned how right we were. But one of the things that happened early on was that we realized that Jason Lawrence's house that abuts Lot 3A, which was the nexus of the development dispute, was actually a really exciting house. And so Bonnie led us all to fast track this thing, and I was one of maybe uncredited co-writers, but Van Edwards and I and Bonnie Warren, that was what we did. And Lombard, it was one of the last full sets of plans that he did, and he was very excited to come. So in vintage, very similar to the first part of the Thomas Allin house, but one cool thing about the Allin West house is that it reuses structural timbers from the first period. And it's very clear. You go underneath it, you see all these massive notched things. And so the stuff that's reused there is probably from 700 to 1700 to 1725. I don't know, there's no dendro or anything on them. It's not like pre-King Philip's War timbers, but it's very exciting because it takes you another generation closer to the very beginnings of English structure building in the area. Here's another cool thing that happened. As I got more involved with the Preservation Society, became a trustee, became vice president, I will never forget one meeting of the trustees up here in this library. So one of the things I had done in 2011 was use, and it was my first foray with this software, using deep plotting software. You enter in textual descriptions, the meets and bounds, the compass orientations, and how many chains and rods of each dimension of every plot of land, going through the many page division of General Thomas Allen's property after his death. That was filed in 1802. There were 12 or 14 or 15 parcels, and that's what the computer had spit out for me, and I overlaid it on a USGS map of Barrington. So a year and a half later, somebody comes into a trustee meeting of the Preservation Society with a map. And the map isn't labeled. And I'm like, I know that shape. That's my aunt's spleen. No, it was, it was an amazing moment. And this is in fact the sketch map where Thomas Allen, who had the surveyor skills, having hashed it out with his brother, split the family farm in half. At the death of their father, the two by then young adult sons ended up filing a deed that cut the farm in half, and it was the compass direction and the bearing and the distance of, and I think it's measured from butternut tree to butternut tree, right down the middle of that thing, and that's Washington Road. And every time I drive on Washington Road, I realize, well, this was laid out in 1768 by Thomas Allen. And now we don't have the original, it's still in private hands. It was handed down in the contents of a desk to its current owner. But we have a very nice digital image of that. So I realized that, okay, I was never going to stop learning stuff about the house. Fast forward another couple of years, and here in 2017, I'd been interested in the Allin family burying ground, which is on Bay Spring Avenue, about 5 blocks west. And it is, or was, the family burying ground of the family. And I had always been a little bit wistful that Amy Allen's gravestone was not there next to Thomas Allen's gravestone. There was just a blank space. But in 2017, one of the excellent things the Barrington Cemetery Commission did was that they had that wonderful team of cemetery conservators come, and they probed for stones that had been, under the sod, and they found Amy's stone and carefully got it out, cleaned it, and reset it, and it's still there now, and it's absolutely much cleaner and brighter than her husband's because it's missed several decades of acid rain and all that. But the other thing that really played on me that whole time, and I'm remembering back to an article that Richard A. Korn, the guy at your house, that you Laura, help me out. Who'd you buy your house from?
Baxt.
Baxt. Oh.
Charlie Baxt.
Yeah, was it Baxt or was it somebody else? A Projo editor who wrote an excellent column about this gravestone. So the whole, if you're familiar with the Allen family burying ground, or if you're not, all the folks with stones are buried in basically half the lot, and then there's this vast empty space, and then there's this, all by itself, Scipio Freeman, a man of color, a veteran of the Revolution, who's buried, with a gorgeous head and footstone by himself, died in 1817. And I'd always sort of wondered about that. The name implies that he was manumitted. And the jury's still out on whether he had become a freeman before or as a result of his service in the Revolution, because there is a Scipio Richmond who was free before the Revolution, who I'm still not 100% certain that they're the same person, but I think they are.
I bet it is.
I mean, it's like 99.9. It's like,
They live behind the Albert Beck house.
Exactly. Oh, yeah, and that's where he lived. And so he was actually, and he was the second that we know of, the second person of color to own deeded property in Barrington. He had a quarter acre right beside the alley, right behind, up above the Peck House. It was not until 2021, I'm getting ahead of myself now, because what else happened in the intervening time? So I became president of the Preservation Society in 2017. We had a whole lot of stuff celebrating the tricentennial of Barrington, Massachusetts. In 2018 to 2019, I moved to England for a year with my wife and kids. By that time, my parents, who had lived with us in the house, had both died. My father died the day of the HPHC Heritage Conference held in Warren in April of 2014. He died the day of a bus tour that came around Barrington. I remember that vividly. And my mother died in February of 2017, just as the tricentennial was getting kicked off. A lot of events. And so it was after we came back from England in 2019 that I was like, okay, we're finally going to get some time to go back to the Allin house, having learned so much more about it from people who lived there, from other sources throughout the community, and realizing how intertwined, and it's true of any property, you can learn more about how the history of a property is intertwined with the history of the larger community. That's a never-ending process, right? So at some point you have to say, okay, I'm going to be done with this. And then, of course, the pandemic slowed down a lot of things. My next phase of research on the house and sharing it with the town, I was contracted to do a presentation in the public schools in the spring of 2020. And that didn't happen because the spring of 2020 was unfortunate time for public health. But that was when Stephen, you, and David Weed stepped in to help create videos out of many of the projects that we've done. And so there is a video on the Allin house that's still linked from the Barrington Preservation YouTube and website. But it was really in 2021 that a lot of other threads came together. And I want to sort of recapture my narrative a little bit here. In late 2020, early 2021, there were many new threads converging. And Stephen, I know you're filming me. I want to give you credit, though, so you can turn around and film yourself. Stephen, my successor as president of the Preservation Society, led the charge, really, to encourage a lot of us to research enslaved people in Barrington. And that was part of a larger groundswell. And Maria, you've very carefully and correctly named a lot of the concurring threads in this. Charlotte Carrington Farmer at Roger Williams University, another resident of Barrington, had reached out to us to set up internships, and they had happened before on different topics. Internships of RWU students working in Barrington history resources. But one of the topics that we set on, I think, really largely with Stephen's influence, was coalescing into researching enslaved people in Barrington, with an eye to affiliating with the relatively new program then, the Rhode Island Slave History Medallion Program under Charles Roberts of Newport, observing the history of enslavement throughout Rhode Island. And it was really independently in the same season that the Barrington Cemetery Commission, with Sue Chiro's guidance, independently and excellently did GPR surveys, ground penetrating radar surveys, which allow you to detect unmarked burials in totally non-invasive ways, but quite trustworthy ways. The technology was evolving rapidly, and she had them do this, and they uncovered a whole cluster of unmarked burials in that seemingly empty portion of the Allin burying ground, for which the only marker is that of Scipio Freeman. So all of these things pointed to two things. It pointed to a groundswell of interest in a town-wide effort to research people of color and the role of slavery in the history of our community. And also for me, it underscored the value of the Allin family as kind of a marker of this larger phenomenon. And so I got excited. I did a second version of the Allin chart, and it grew. And this grew just beyond the people who owned and lived in the house. This is every person who's buried in the Allin burying ground for whom there is a stone, which means every white person. There are just over 100 of them, and they start in the 17 teens and they come down to 1921, and they're all related because it was just private land. So unlike Princess Hill Cemetery, which was part of an early kind of town planning thing, and that's true also of the Knockham Hill Cemetery, which is sort of across an estuary from Knockham Hill. And it's also true of the little cemetery at the point, the bottom of New Meadow Neck, Tyler's Point. Of the 4 oldest cemeteries in Barrington, this one uniquely was private land. Actually I found the deed. It was the end of the 19th century. Thomas Bicknell sold it to the town. I shared this with Sue Chereau, and I told her, I don't think Thomas Bicknell had any clear title to sell the cemetery to the town, but he was the kind of guy who did what he wanted. I think we know people like that in public life. So I called this the white kinship chart, and that implies that that implies that there are other people who aren't charted. And so this was a really cool moment. Stephen, I don't know if you remember this, when I was just taking some random pics of, this is Kristen and Courtney, Roger Williams students, and you're looking over their shoulder, and they're going through some of the Peck collection documents. And one of the things they found at this moment, and it's sort of a rediscovery, because I mean we had volunteers typing up the finding aids and all this, but I hadn't been going through these myself. And this is, they found actually Scipio Freeman's land deed selling a 1/4 acre up above the Albert Peck house. And that's the moment when they said, oh, wait a minute, this looks interesting. Sorry, Scipio Richmond, not Scipio Freeman. And so I kind of captured that moment of this process. But I realized that there was a lot that I had already come into contact with researching the Allin family as landowners that really, lets you into a view from some of the enslaved people in their households. So this is the inventory of Matthew Allin, the father of General Thomas and his brother Matthew, which lists the 9 slaves. It names them. It assigns values. So this is from 1761. This is values in English pounds, and I'm not sure exactly which tenor this is, but they're listed with swine, sheep, calves, oxen, steers, a bull, cattle, etc. I mean, they're in the livestock section on page 3. But this is the kind of place that it's relatively recently the genealogists, the local historians, have really started to realize, oh, well, we have these resources at hand. We have the opportunity to learn more about, the rest of our community. So one of the things I remember doing in that year, when the interns were working, when a lot of these projects were going forward simultaneously, so this was with my younger daughter, Amelia, up in the attic of the town hall with the clerk's permission, pulling a probate file for 2 men named Allin, who were formerly enslaved by the Allin family and who had fought in the Revolution and had died. It's not clear how they had died, but they were since deceased. And Thomas Allin, as the head of the white Allin family, was de facto the administrator of their estates. And one of them had been a soldier in the first, they both had been soldiers in the Black Regiment, but one of them had also been a deckhand on a privateer sailing out of Boston. And as a privateer hand on a successful cruise, he was actually entitled to a buttload of money. Here is the petition by which his wife, Patience Lawrence, an Indian, by the way, he was identified as African, she was identified as Indian, and we know this because the probate file includes an attestation by, is it Solomon Townsend, as was he town clerk, or was he clerk of the
Town clerk.
church?
He was town
He was
clerk.
town clerk, attesting that he had married them, or that they had been married by the minister of the White Church. Even though they're not in the vital record book, that marriage is not in the vital record book. It's only in this slip that is in the paper, because that was the thing that would entitle Patience to any money. And she sends a respectful appeal, signs it by Mark, Patience Allin, and we don't know if she got anything. Another thing is, just in preparing this slide set this week, I realized that there's another Patience. There is a Patience with no last name, also an Indian, who indentures her own daughter, Susanna. This is over 10 years later, in 1794, to Asa Bullock of Riverside, her 7-year-old daughter. She indentures out, and the daughter is too young to be the daughter of, if Patience is the same Patience, the daughter is not the daughter of Richard Allin, but of a subsequent partner. And so one of the things that a lot of people have done, and I tried my hand in it as well, is to compile family trees of what we know, and there's so many lacunae, of people who had been enslaved, people who had been indentured, the descendants of people who had been enslaved. One of our most copious informants about these people is actually Thomas Bicknell, who, for however we assess his motives or reassess his motives and some of the other efforts that he did, he remains one of our best witnesses to this whole community of people. And so that it just needs to be said. The involvement of the Allin family with enslaved people is not unique in the town. There's an echelon of 4 or 5 slave-owning families that collectively had the most enslaved people and indentured people: the Allins, the Bicknells, the Tiffanys, and also the Smiths of Rumstick Point. Those 4 families basically accounted for most of the enslaved people in the late 18th century censuses. And then, of course, after emancipation, these people remained in the households of the people who had formerly been, many remained in the households. And in the 1800 census, Amy Allin, Thomas's widow, recently widowed, headed a household including 12 free people of color, but who were her dependents in her household. So they were free according to the census. They had been emancipated in one way or another, to one degree or another. And this relationship really continues forward through the 1810 census. So what we know of the Allin family's kind of patronage and enslavement of people is a continuous narrative that goes back to 1704. The earliest evidence of enslavement by the Allin family is not the earliest evidence of enslavement in Barrington, as Stephen's articles have shown us. That goes back to the first generation of English settlement in Swansea, in the mother town of Barrington, from the 1660s. Reverend John Miles, who is lauded as somebody forward-thinking and tolerant, was also himself a slave owner, and many of his contemporaries who led the town at that time. So I think it was from notes of Pat Muse from the Warren Middle Passage Project that I realized that this deed, a deed of purchase by Thomas Allin, who is the grandfather of the Thomas Allin who built our house, in which he buys a Negro boy, so described in the deed, named Felix, from another Allin, Benjamin Allin, and I told you it's part of the confusing, unrelated Allin families. Benjamin Allin of Rehoboth sold Felix to Thomas Allin of West Barrington in 1704, and that begins what we can see as an uninterrupted episode of enslavement of people, both indigenous and African, within the Allin family in West Barrington, down through 1810. And the original, as I learned from Pat Muse's notes, is held at the Rhode Island Historical Society. The deed was duly recorded in Taunton in the Registry of Deeds for Bristol County, Massachusetts, and that's where I first encountered it. But I, have since gone to check this out for, among other reasons, because the person who sold Felix to Thomas Allin, this other Benjamin Allin, happens to be an ancestor of mine.
That's the Sandwich Allens.
Sorry?
That's the Sandwich Allens.
No. It's the Essex County, Massachusetts Allens. Benjamin moved from, I want to say Newburyport or Haverhill down to Rehoboth after King Philipsville. And that Benjamin Allin, the seller, is the grandfather of the Joseph Allin, who was the builder of the Allin West House. So that's the.
Yeah, that's where they lived.
There's going to be a quiz. I hope you all. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of these threads culminated in 2022 with the presentation of a Rhode Island slave history medallion. And for me, it was at that moment that I was like, okay, well, a lot of this needs to get folded back into this ongoing work on the Allin, the General Thomas Allin House, because it really represented a whole new chapter that I had not conceived at all back in 2011. And here is 1704 Felix. This is just a screen grab from a small, I think it's a 3-minute video, which shows snippets of the ceremony, and it shows snippets of the work of the Roger Williams interns and their classmates in sort of visual arts classmates who put together these excellent displays sort of showing us visually something of the recovered history of these folks. The other thing I realized in folding this into and working towards the nomination is that the Thomas Allin House is not unique in this role of the witness to enslavement as a fact of our community's history. So it joins these 5 other houses, all of which are 18th century, all of which coexisted as structures in the period in which the people who built them or their family members had enslaved people. And so I didn't put the names on them. You've got the John Martin House at the top left, which we made a valiant effort. It was respectfully declined by the State Preservation Commission for National Register listing on various integrity, but not until after I compiled 100+ dossier, which is okay. It was cool. In the middle at the top, I feel like, and behind this door is a goat. No, in the middle at the top is and it's the house that's the most similar in footprint to the General Thomas Allin House. That's the Ebenezer Tiffany House. Ebenezer? Am I getting the name wrong? The Tiffany House on Maple. That's apartments and vinyl siding, so it doesn't qualify for a plaque. The Samuel Allin House, third unrelated Allin family, ding, 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 top right, at the bottom of the Wampanoag Trail. The headmaster's house for St. Andrew's School, the Joshua Bicknell House, at bottom right. Oh, I'm sorry, no, that's Bonnie's house at top right.
Yes.
Peleg Richmond House, and the Samuel Allin House, and it's
Sam Allen's house.
the Sam Allin House is middle bottom there, at the bottom of the,
It's on the trail. It's on the
at the bottom of the trail, bottom middle, and then my house is bottom up. So together, these 6 houses, so the Smith House on Rumstick Point, there is no longer an extant Smith Garrison House, which had been a fixture through the middle of the 20th century in Barrington, or into the middle of the 20th century. But there are witnesses that still survive, and together these houses have that part of a story to tell, and I think that's worth us remembering. So I've gone over time. We've all gone over time. How did this all come back into a dossier? And it's not actually that thick. I used a sort of an icon here. It's only 147 pages or something like that. But this is, so while the Allin family's role in the history of enslavement was not unique, I realized, well, this could be part of, well, I didn't realize, I asked Joanna, could this be part of, does this fly as part of a National Register nomination? And working with Bonnie and Maria and others, I'd long had a collective interest in the sort of cadre of 18th century houses, but thinking that some of them have this interesting role as a witness to slavery. You know, does that make a criterion of significance? So from 2022 to last year, you know, I worked gradually more insistently with Joanna at State, you know, to kind of revive the long dormant process. And Joanna astutely recognized that I was in an unusual position of having, you know, too much research on my hands and not quite the right skill set to bring it home. And you very tactfully and excellently suggested Catherine Kavanaugh, whom I will absolutely robustly recommend to anybody in this process as well. And you know, Catherine really did. Kathy, you did. I don't know. You did 2 or 3 things. You took all my inexpert architectural stuff and you made it correct. You know, even where I had observed something, I hadn't described it correctly. This kind of thing. You did an excellent job of distilling so much detail of the context of the history of the house into the dossier. But then, you know, finally and most importantly, you digested all this new research on the history of people of color in this community, and considering it sort of with an outsider's view as, does this tell a compelling story? Presented it well to the folks at State to say, well, yes, this is, you know, a worthwhile criterion. And you did it extremely quickly, and that just also satisfied both me and, you know, Joanna, who didn't want to hear from me anymore. So that was excellent. So I'm under no illusions that there is not more to be learned about this property. I'm a little bit closer to realizing that, well, I might not have to continue to actively seek to learn more about this property, but it's great to think ahead, and it's great to think ahead for us in the town of Barrington about what else can we do to recognize and to educate ourselves about the landscape that represents our history here. And so, you know, I hope that may be some of what spurs our questions here. But for my part, I'm just happy to have had this opportunity to share the kind of personal version of the journey, and I'm just conscious that I've taken more than my time. So thank you.